welcome to the second of our walks for the Harlech Historical Society. We've swapped places this time, so John is behind the camera. We've got an archaeological topic for you today. We should be following the line of an ancient trackway that runs from here in Llanbedr up to the slopes of Moel Goedog behind Harlech, and it starts with this massive monolith here behind me. This stone was erected during the Bronze Age, some 4,000 years ago. It's 11 feet high, that's nearly 3.5 meters, and there'll be about another third of it underground as well. It would have had to have been brought to this location, and that would have required planning, teamwork, and a great deal of hard labour. Oh, the smaller one on my left here is probably a Victorian addition. It's hard to say how many standing stones there were originally on this route. Today there are 9. Within living memory there were 10, but there may be more than that, particularly on the lower ground, which has better agricultural value. We have the River Atro behind us, but in 1819 it was diverted to improve harbour facilities over at Pensarn. Prior to that we would have been much closer to the coast here, and this stone would actually have marked a landing point for small craft navigating this section of the Welsh coastline. Our destination then is the western flank of Moel Goedog. There we will find 2 Bronze Age cairns, technically complex ring cairns. One of those was excavated in the late 1970s by Francis Lynch, and this is what she said of the relationship between those cairns and the standing stones. The circles on Moel Goedog are not only a pair, but form part of a linear group of monuments set alongside an important trackway which runs up the coast from Llanbedr. From that excavation we learn that individuals were buried, or perhaps reburied, within the body of the cairn, and I'm going to focus in on one of those called F10. The F just stands for feature. F10 was a pit dug into the cairn and into which a pot was placed, technically a collared urn. The urn contained oak charcoal, cremated human bone, and some sandy soil. Now the sandy soil was not native either to the cairn or the area around it, so the assumption there is that this was a reburial, perhaps from somewhere near the coast. The oak charcoal returned a date of 1,685 years BC, plus or minus 70 years, and the cremated human bone was analysed and found to be that of a young adult. Nothing further could be said about the individual other than that. One final item was the pot itself, or rather the temper that went into its production. Potters used temper to help prevent shrinkage and cracking during the firing process. Now this temper was a gritty mineral substance that was not native to this geological area. It was not native to the Harlech Dome area. So the assumption there is that the pot was made elsewhere. So given these details, we've got the faint outline of a possible narrative here. The pot was made elsewhere. It was brought here, possibly by sea. This was a reburial, remember, so perhaps the time for mourning was over, and this was a time to celebrate the life of the young individual whose remains were contained within the urn. They would have set off along this track for a ceremonial reburial of the individual in the ring cairn on the slopes of Moel Goedog. Now here is a cardboard copy of the urn that Francis Lynch excavated from F10 on Moel Goedog. It's about 1/3 the size of the original, which was 28 centimetres tall, but that wouldn't have fitted in my top pocket. Now we're going to carry this with us up to Moel Goedog in a light-hearted recreation of the events that took place here some 3,700 years ago. I'll just say a little bit about the route. we'll be following the closest practical approximation to the prehistoric trackway and visiting all the extant stones along the way. It's, as I said, it's about 5 miles and it takes us up to about 1,000 feet above sea level. If you want to do it, do bear in mind though that it's a linear walk, so you'll have to factor in getting back to a car or a bus stop. Let me show you the map very briefly. Just a very quick run through on the map. We've got Falmouth down here, Harlech up here, and Llanbedr just here. There are the standing stones. We head back into Llanbedr, out along this minor road here, follow that along to the trackway here. We go up the trackway to Penrallt and then head off to Hengaeau. To Hengaeau we head over to the road that comes out of Llanfair and heads north up above Harlech. Past Moel Goedog, past the Moel Goedog crossroads, and simply follow that road along, ignoring the right turn there. Up past Merthyr Farm to the point where the track divides, the metal road goes down into Telsarnau, and the track we want bears right and heads up to Moel Goedog. There it is with the hill fort on the summit and the 2 cairn circles. The one we're going to in particular, the left one here, Moel Goedog 1, and that's the final destination. I put a more detailed map and route description at the end of this video. Now we're on private land here with the landowner's permission, but there's a public footpath a couple of 100 metres to our left, which would be a perfectly acceptable place from which to start this walk. Right, let's head off to the next stone and I'll tell you a bit more about the fascinating archaeology of the route. Well, here we are at the second stone marking the route. It's called Hengaeau after a nearby farm, and it's had walls, a sheep pen and a field clearance cairn built around it, but I can show you a better image of it in a still picture. At this point I'd like to say a word of thanks to some of the people whose archaeological research I've relied on for the background to this walk, and first amongst them would be the late Colin Gresham. Colin wrote the prehistoric chapters to the History of Meirionydd, Volume 1, which came out in 1967 and is still the Bible for anyone interested in the archaeology of Meirionydd. Francis Lynch I've already mentioned. Francis has spoken to our society on a number of occasions, and she was the first person to observe, at least in print, the relationship between the standing stones and the 2 ring cairns that we're on our way to. Finally, regarding this site in particular, I think we should thank Richard Kelly. Richard Kelly worked for the Gwynedd Archaeological Trust, and he came here in the late 1970s to look at the standing stone. But when he was here, he found something very interesting and much, much older. This is what he wrote. One site which ought to be seriously considered as that of a ruined megalith, and thus added to the list of extant sites in the district. What he believed he'd found was a Neolithic portal dolmen. And what that means for us is that when these Bronze Age people came here and erected this standing stone, there was already a monument here, and that monument was already some 2,000 years old. So these people were walking with their ancestors, as perhaps in effect we are today as well. From here we follow a lovely green lane, but it only continues for a few 100 yards, and after that we'll have to continue our route by other means. Well, here we have the aerial view of the Hengaeau standing stone. It's in this field clearance cairn here. Now, the route goes north from here along this green lane, but comes to an abrupt end at this point. Let me zoom out a bit. The direction that you will want to take will be roughly northwest to meet up with the minor road coming up out of Llanfair. But the route of the ancient trackway is not clear at all. And it must have gone north. So it must have gone, roughly speaking, past Bruin Llynau, this farm here. Now you can see how well cleared the fields are around it. So there doesn't seem to be much chance of finding it there. Let me zoom out again. Until we get up to this brown you can see is actually dead bracken on uncleared ground, or relatively uncleared ground. So there's a better chance of picking it up here. And that is Moel Goedog, the ancient settlement. And if we zoom in to one of the fields nearby, we can see a linear feature on here, and it seems to be it's walling, and it's two lines of walling in some places and single in others. It's double there and it's single for a while. There's a bit of double there, and there's walling on both sides again there. It comes to a dead end where this field gets cleared. Now if it's going to join up, if this is it, and if it's going to join up with the footpath that takes us past the missing stone that Colin Gresham recorded, it'll have to come down this way, past the waterworks, onto a footpath here. Let me zoom out a bit. The standing stone used to be here, about halfway between this minor road and the farm of Drws yr Ymlydd. Now we won't be going this way, and I'll show you why. I'll just change to the map. So the stone was about there, and here's the farm. Now this is what the footpath does. It heads off too much to the west for our purposes. The next standing stone we want is here, but there's no obvious public right-of-way to get there. We can't get back to the road in time for the next standing stone, so instead we're going to follow this road along here instead. But while we're here, let me change back to the aerial view and zoom in on this point here. Here's the next standing stone in the route. Now when we get there, I'm going to mention this feature here. It's a Bronze Age cairn, and it's not clearly visible from the ground anymore. It's been heavily rocked out, and it's even with relatively low levels of grass, it's not easy to see. So there we are, we've had a look at it now. Let's go back to the beginning of the possible trackway that we looked at earlier. Back past the waterworks and the Real Gore crossroads. Here's Moel Goedog again, and if we zoom in to this point here, we'll go back down to earth here and have a look at this trackway on the ground. Well, here we are back on terra firma, and as you can probably see straight away, this is not a good time of year for looking at low-lying archaeological features. The bracken is still up and the grass is quite long, especially after the heavy rain that we've just had. There's no public access running east-west across this field, but there are two footpaths that cross it, sort of roughly speaking north-south. So it is possible to come and have a look at this feature, this possible trackway, if you wanted to do that. Right, let's move on to re Goedog. Here we are at the re Goedog crossroads. The field that we were just looking at is to our left, and the track that we'll be taking is to our right. But that may not be the original track itself. The road you see behind me has a footpath leading off it. The footpath runs roughly parallel to the road we'll be taking, and that footpath did have a standing stone on it. Colin Gresham thought that that standing stone was one of this series. Now we won't be going that way today. Our route follows this road north, and we'll be moving on now to the next stone called Harlech. Here we are at Harlech. That's what it's called today. It simply means rock or stone. Perhaps it's had other names during the thousands of years that it stood here. There's another Bronze Age monument in this field as well. There's a heavily robbed out cairn behind me. I don't know if you can see it. We don't know what came first, the cairn or the stone. Either way, it adds to the monumental inventory of this trackway that we're walking today. We've got the landowner's permission to be in this field, but if you haven't, the road is just a couple of meters to my right. Let's move on to the next stone. Another fine men here, and this is my favourite. It's got a wonderfully sculptural quality to it. It's 8 foot 6 inches high, which is a little under 3 meters, and it's the last of the really big ones. Colin Gresham called it Moel Goedog after the nearby hill. The hill these days is better known as Moel Goedog. Now this stretch of road that we're on now is marked on the OS map as Harlech here, which can be translated roughly as the Hill of the Long Stones. And Pennant came here in 1783, and this is what he says. I must observe that this place is called Harlech here, or the loud shout or cry to battle. Possibly it had been a field of combat, and a chieftain had fell here. For one of the mine Hirion is of a distinguished size. He's almost certainly talking about this one here. Gresham says of it, this stone is placed just below the crest of a low ridge over which the track passes, and so would have appeared on the skyline when approached from the south. Well, the dry stone walls spoil that effect slightly these days, but it's still a fine sight indeed. We have the farmer's permission to be in the field here today, but the stone is easily visible either from the cattle grid or from the gate to my left. Colin Gresham measured this one at 2 foot 6, so well under a metre, and the smallest stone in the whole sequence. It's got this odd notch in it here, and it's very difficult to say whether that was an original feature or added later. I've tried lining it up with things. It doesn't line up anything in that direction, but in that direction it provides a viewpoint of the coast slightly to the south of Shell Island, so possibly where the River Atro met the sea, but that might be purely coincidental. The next two stones are together. They're small as well, and they're just up the road there. Let's go and take a look. We're at the junction here. There are two standing stones. This one on the western side of the road, and a rather curious one on the eastern side, which we'll go and have a look at in a minute. Pennant came this way and complained that from here the road is intolerably bad and stony till I reach the house of Glyn, my kinsman. And Gerald of Wales came this way as well in 1166, in the company of the Archbishop of Canterbury and at least one Welsh prince. They were headed for Nevin and the Llyn Peninsula. Let's go over the road and have a look at the other stone. Well, here we are at stone number 7, and this one challenges our ideas of what a standing stone ought to look like. And it also makes us question, what were these Bronze Age people looking for in the stones that they chose? Surely they were more than just way markers. Perhaps they had characters of their own. Perhaps they represented people or deities or spirits of some sort. We'll never know for sure, but the questions are still interesting enough to ask. Here's our penultimate stone. Colin Gresham describes it as a rounded boulder. And that is Moel Goedog that you can see behind me. Let's move on to the final stone. Here we are at the final stone. That's Moel Goedog behind me, and on its summit there's an Iron Age hill fort, and that attests to the stratified layers of human history that we find strung out along this trackway. I can also see the upper of the 2 ring cairns. We won't be going to that one. We're going to see the lower one of the 2, Moel Goedog 1. Well, here we are at Moel Goedog 1. It's classified as a ring cairn because of that ring of standing stones, mainly contiguous standing stones, defining a central area, and behind those standing stones there is a low stone platform. And this is how Francis Lynch described it. The monument is effectively planned and consequently impressive despite its small size. It has been carefully sited so as to be visible from a specific direction and distance. The interior was deliberately levelled so as to provide an appropriate platform for ceremonies, while the circle of uprights and the stone ring backing them on the natural slope give a dramatic definition to the spot. And what a spot! The word panoramic is indeed suitable here. We have the estuary, the Snowdon Massif, the Dramatic Bay and the Llyn Peninsula. And it's hard not to believe that the landscape itself played a part in whatever meaning these places had for the people who built this monument. Now we've moved down into the centre of the cairn, the levelled platform in the centre, and I can tell you from the excavation report that F10, the feature that contained our pot, our collared urn, was found about here. It was placed in the ground in an inverted position, and the stone was placed on top of it, and then earth levelled out on top of that. Now, at the risk of sounding obvious, I'm not going to leave this here because it would be litter the minute we turned our back. So we're going to take this away with us now. And there's one more element of this ceremony that we have to complete. And for that, we need to go back down into Llanbedr. Well, here we are, finally out of the wind and down in our favourite pub. And I'm sure the people who carried the remains of our young adult up to that ring cairn on Moel Goedog would have approved. Thank you very much for joining us, and thank you very much, John, for doing the camera work and being my companion on this walk. Let's hope that next year we can get some mud on our boots and do these walks by more traditional means. Here we are on a more detailed description of the route, and you'll be starting off around here. I think those are the 2 standing stones marked there. My advice is to go back into Llanbedr. There are other options for starting this route, but I think that's the best way. Back into Llanbedr, turn left before the bridge and left again before the war memorial. That'll take you onto this minor road here, which you then follow for some distance, ignoring that right turn which doubles back on itself there. and continue until you reach this point here. There's a tarmac road leading off, or a track leading off to the right. After the bend it turns into a concrete track. That's how you'll know if you're on the right one. It then goes through what appears to be, and actually is, somebody's front garden, and continues uphill through a couple of gates, through a bit of woodland, until you get to Penralch. Now the map's not particularly helpful here, so I'm going to switch to the satellite view. There's Penralch Farm. Zoom in a bit. This is the way you came up, and this is roughly where you'll be. There is a stile there, but you don't want that one. There's another stile, often hidden in the undergrowth around here. It's this piece of land that you need to get through. The exit is there, so you can literally go through there like that, onto this track here, which will lead you up onto the green lane here. And the second standing stone is here. Then you'll carry on along the green lane until it peters out here. At that point you turn right and go through that gateway there, and then onto a pedestrian gateway there, which will get you into this large field here. You want to go to the top left hand corner of the field, through a gate there, and then almost immediately through a second gate there, which will get you onto this track here, and that takes you on to this, joins this track here. You cross the cattle grid, and that brings you onto the road that comes up from Llanfair and then heads north across and above Harlech. Let's go back to the map now. Here we are back at Penralch. So you continue along here, up the green lane, into this field here, through the gate there, from top left of this field, through one gate and then another, onto the road that comes down from your right here, over the cattle grid, and onto the minor road here. From here it's relatively simple. You just carry on along here, past Moel Goedog, an ancient settlement, which is worth a look if you've got the time, straight along to the re-enactment crossroads, straight across and along to the third standing stone, which is it's there actually, just about there. Carry on along the road, ignore the right turn here, keep left, past another standing stone there. Now you'll see at this point the road is called Fron Llech here. Well, it should read Fron Llech here. Anyway, past Merthyr Farm to the junction here. The tarmac road carries on in this direction, but we turn off onto the trackway here, which takes you onto Moel Goedog. There's the Iron Age hill fort on the summit, and here are the two cairns that we've come to see. That's the Moel Goedog 1, the westernmost of the two, and that is the final destination of the walk.